nobody thought that data scientists are crucial players in agriculture. And they are. For the vertical farming industry, they are. Because we can control a lot of the environment that we have. We can collect so much data. And we need to know how to process this data and how to improve the system, how to make the systems smart. Like AI is something that is out there to improve the use efficiency of vertical farms. And data scientists are a key part of it. And it's already changing. It's not something in the future. Like if we think about the colleagues that I have, our team, our R&D team, of course, we have biologists, we have horticulturists, agronomists, but part of it is it's really engineers, data scientists. That's the core of it.
This is a conversation about the future of urban farming with Viviana Correa Galvis, who's a biologist and team lead at Infarm, one of Europe's largest urban agricultural companies. I'm Shane Farnsworth, and this is the Escape Sapiens podcast. These conversations are supported by the Andrea von Braun Foundation. If you find what I'm doing valuable, you can help me out by liking, sharing, and subscribing. And now, I'm pleased to bring you Viviana Correa Galvis. I hope you enjoy.
Escape Sapiens.
I'm going to start off somewhere quite basic. So just to start off with, what is urban farming and what is vertical farming?
Yeah, urban farming is something that has been happening a lot and for a long time ago. We can start very early on in Egypt, for example. So we know that Asian civilizations just grew crops near settlements. That happened in Egypt, that happened in the Aztecs, in China, where crops were grown closer to the people that were consuming them in the earliest urban centers. That's what we can call urban farming. Also, the origins of hydroponic growth is found in those settlements already. And then, throughout history, in the Middle Ages, people also grew crops inside the earlier cities, so that's already urban farming. I guess through time, the model of how we produce food and where we produce food changed, and it moved from having the food produced close to where it's consumed to be produced somewhere else and be transported into cities. And that's kind of like the disconnect throughout history of what urban farming was. And maybe to jump to our current time, so urban farming kind of became the essence of what we call now vertical farming. It's the same principle in essence. So you want to have locally grown food. Locally grown means closer to whoever is consuming. And we have our population lives mostly in urban areas. So the idea was then to bring back the growing that was happening outside growing areas, far away from the cities, into the cities. And vertical farming is an adaptation of urban farming, you can call it, or a new version of urban farming, in which there is still a lot of broad definitions of it, but basically you grow plants in a controlled environment using LEDs illumination, so artificial lighting. How you bring the nutrition to the crops varies depending on the system, but basically it's an indoor growing system in which you could grow plants with artificial lighting, controlled conditions, and these growing centers are located nearby or inside the cities, as for example here in Inffarm in Berlin.
But so urban farm, the vertical farming aspect is relatively new, where you're indoors and you're stacking plants on top of each other. Yes. I just recently started seeing this in cafes and supermarkets. Why is this happening now? Is there some new technology that's come in, or there's some economic shift, or is it for environmental reasons? Why does it seem to be that I'm seeing this more today?
It happens for different factors came together. So first of all, there is an awareness of, in general, that we need to change the way how we grow our food. This is one idea that in general had happened. Next to it, there is a very known professor that kind of pushed the whole movement, which is Dixon Dupommier. He wrote a book about the vertical farm and kind of pushed this idea of having growing centers inside the city. So that's the idea was already there in the last couple of years, But I have to say that the most striking change that could really make this possible was the development of LED technologies. Because we've been growing plants with artificial lighting for years. Greenhouses have been using artificial light to complement sunlight for years, even from the 70s, 60s. Greenhouses do that, for example, in winter to compensate the lack of our light hours. But only until really artificial lighting became cheaper and accessible. That was kind of the push that we needed. And also the available technologies that we have nowadays. We have the technology to have a control system. We have the technology to have an AI environmental control system nowadays. So it's a couple of factors that just came together to give birth to vertical farming. So
it's sort of economically viable these days.
Yes,
because
yeah.
What are the main? So people sort of say that vertical farming is going to be good for the environment in certain ways. So what are the main? Is this also like a big factor? What are the main sort of environmental benefits, I guess? Yeah,
there are many factors. One factor for sure is the fact that you are cutting off supply chain a lot. So having the plants growing close to the supermarkets, close to urban centers, really decreases the amount of resources that you would require to transport food very far away. If you think about it, I read the other day that about 24% of the food that we consume is actually, or that we produce, is lost on the way.
Okay.
Because it's damaged throughout the supply chain. If you think about if you want to have some rosemary for your potatoes, that rosemary to Berlin used to be imported from Morocco. That's really, like if you imagine a plane with pieces of rosemary leaves flying back to Berlin. So with vertical farming, we can really have that shortened supply chain, and that changes quite a lot the impact that we have in terms of CO2 emissions with transporting food. The efficiency at which we can actually use all the food that we produce increases on one side. The other main point is that we grow the plants in a very controlled environment system, so meaning that we have the possibility to optimize the resource efficiency of the system. We can reduce the water consumption significantly, so about 90% of the water that we will produce that we will use to produce foods will be reduced. So we have less water consumption, significantly less water consumption in food production. We will also can optimize the harvesting cycles in a way that we get with as less energy as possible the same amount of food. So basically, those are the main issues.
So I hadn't thought about this actually. So you're using LEDs and not sunlight exclusively, right?
Yes.
So is that offset by the transport savings? As in, is less power overall used, even though you still have to use LEDs?
Yeah, there is still not a very well knowledge on how much this compensates. But it's indeed one of the things that we can do. Like, even though we use artificial lighting, we can actually optimize how much light we need. So we can optimize the use of it. If you think about plants in nature, they don't really use all the sunlight that they receive. Most of the energy is being quenched, is lost, because there are downstream processes in plant metabolism that are limited. So plant light harvesting happens in the matter of milliseconds, nanoseconds, whereas carbon fixation happens at the minute level or seconds, and there are downstream limitations to be able to convert all the light, all the photons into carbohydrates. So not all the light that a plant receives can be used. In vertical farming, we have the possibility to really turn out to what the plant exactly needs. And that might somehow compensate the cost that you do get in energy cost. There are many different things that you can do to optimize the energy efficiency of the system. That's the beauty of it. Whether or not, or whether that's more, or we know that it's more efficient than traditional agriculture. And I think many areas or many institutions that are interested in vertical farming also the vertical farming companies are interested in starting doing more life cycles assessments to really assess what the actual impact is. But potentially we know that it is quite high in terms of energy savings, even though you require energy to run the system.
I mean, and I guess ultimately you can connect to a renewable source of power.
That's also another part of it. The fact that you can really introduce these systems into sustainable energy sources. So the use of solar panels, the use of wind energy to power these farms. Yes.
So when you said quenching, so the plant can get damaged, right, if it has too much sunlight, and so it has all these defense mechanisms in place, and so you can sort of is the idea that you sort of bypass all of those systems by just giving the optimal amount of light to the plant and at the right frequency. Is that the idea, so you can get optimal growth?
Yeah, exactly. So what we do is that we create light recipes that will give the plant exactly the amount of light that they will be using, minimizing the effects of photo damage that can be used, that can trigger any energy, or that can trigger any losses. So you can really say, okay, I mean, if you have a lettuce outside in the summer, this lettuce will get around, 1,000 micromoles of light. They cannot use all of them, but we can grow with 20, 30, 40 micromoles, 200 micromoles of light, this lettuce, and it will have the same yield as a lettuce outside. So you really can decrease the amount of light in the system to make it efficient for the plant to uptake.
I guess you can also position the plant so that any spillover hits the other plant, or the second plant along the line. That is sort of the stacking and orientation. Yeah,
that's something that it depends on the vertical farming. Talking about vertical farms in general, most of them, and it's the same concept that Infarm uses, so you have illumination from the top. But other vertical farms actually have the plants vertically, and you can illuminate from the side. So there is a big range of possibilities that you can implement in order to optimize light use efficiency. There has been also studies on how you can put some lighting from the bottom. So because when in vertical farms you grow the plants in a quite dense manner, so you have a lot of plants together, so maybe shading and leaf overlapping will lower the efficiency of this light harvesting. So you can actually illuminate from the sides to illuminate the leaves that are below.
And I guess you don't want to use the sunlight because then you lose control over the system, and it's not scalable because only the plants on the outside will really see the sun. Is that the idea, or what's the reason that you sort of cut the sun completely out of the cycle?
Well, let's say having sunlight in a controlled environment, it's already a concept that you have in greenhouses. So greenhouses already kind of optimized sunlight capture. So it's not only about light. So vertical farming is also about using a lot of the resources the most efficient way. So of course, if we have solar illumination, you will have to kind of drive it in a way that it will be optimal. So it's easier just to do it with LEDs. But also, if you think about it, vertical farming is a climate resilient system. It's a seasonal resilient system. So the idea of having vertical farms producing food, it's also to have availability of food all year round. You don't want to, you can have the same fresh herbs, same fresh lettuces in summer, in winter, in autumn. It doesn't matter. So we're independent of that. It's also climate resilient in that sense. So that's one of the pluses also when it comes to the challenges that we face when it comes to food production nowadays. We need to find new ways to be more resilient.
So you can grow anywhere at any time. Actually, that's okay. This might be a bit of a dumb question, but I guess you can run the system overnight, right?
Yes.
So do plants sleep? Do they need sleep?
They do. They do need sleep. But you can run the farms 24 hours. We do that. But let's say we don't have to stick to the daylight routine that you have outside. And that's also that has to do with the energy efficiency strategies that you can apply in a vertical farm. So to go back to your questions, do plants need sleep? They do need sleep, but it has been also shown that you can grow plants to reach a certain productivity 24 hours. Mm-hmm. They don't do, let's say, you're just pushing them to the edge, and then they kind of, they can get the yield that you wanted. Mm. But then they have to grow very, very fast, and you need to harvest them very, very fast. Like to give you an example, some crops like mint, they do actually quite well in 24-hour cycles. Mm-hmm. Some others, like basil, they don't really like it so much, and you don't really gain much yield. Mm-hmm. So the idea of having 24-hour lights that you have to that you reduce the growing cycle, so you can produce the same biomass in a shorter amount of time, right? Mm-hmm. So in general, they do. Plant metabolism is guided by the circadian clock. So mm-hmm. they will need. Of course, we know that the clock has been evolving with plants itself. So you have during the day all this light harvesting and CO2 metabolism, and then they need a night to catabolize mm-hmm. these sugars to create biomass, to create secondary metabolites, primary metabolism, amino acid, etc. So they do need this rest, but you can push this time of rest to make it as short as possible so that you can produce as much biomass as possible. But you can also do very you can also apply various strategies to use light efficiently throughout the whole day. So at Infarm, for example, we do have a system in which we have our farm turned on all the time, but we have light stages and dark stages. Mm-hmm. So plants are actually moving between stages, between day and night, but the farm is working 24 hours. Mm. So that's how you can improve the energy use efficiency as well. So you have it on all the time, but you have the plants moving from the dark to the light stages.
So really, you really do need an automated system.
Yes. So that's also one of the beauties, I think, of vertical farming, is that it's an industry that it actually needs innovation and applies innovation already. So it's a system in which you put together agronomists, engineers, data mm-hmm. scientists to create the most optimal growing system. So it's and this is something that we can just do now. We have the technology now to do that. Which
sort of makes sense why I'm sort of seeing this and the hype surrounding it coming now. So then, what is the space saving that you can actually, if you had the optimum system, how much land could you return to the wild? What do you save? What's the saving in the footprint?
We started to measure that, and I don't have the numbers now in my head, but we've been actually, quantifying now how much land you can save, and it's quite significant if you think about it. So, for example, I can tell you one of the farms that we have, our major farming system, is 154 square meters mm-hmm. in area, mm-hmm. and you will see it, and it's quite a lot. And in only 20 square meters, you can produce around 500 kilograms of herbs.
How does that compare to the same?
It's higher. So it depends on the system, but we do know that vertical farms can have a higher use of space compared to traditional agriculture. Is
that do you mean over the course of a year or
per square meter? So in terms of kilograms of crop, mm-hmm. in terms of leafy greens or fruits or whatever, per square meter, the yields are definitely higher than mm-hmm. compared to greenhouse agriculture, for example.
And I guess another aspect of that is because you can run the system constantly and you can run overnight, you can run, how many cycles can you do in the year compared to out in the field? If you say, for example, you wanted to grow tomatoes, can you do, say, for example, 4 harvests in the space that you do?
Well, it's a good question, and it's very case specific, but let's say, and it depends on the crop as well. So I'm gonna try to be fair in terms of the comparison. So let's say a lettuce in a greenhouse can grow can reach the around 300 grams in around, let's say, 4 or 5 weeks. If we put about it, we can reach the same in 3 weeks.
Okay.
So you and in way more less space.
I see.
So you do really have quite a bunch, and we do it all year round. So that's
over winter as well.
So yeah, it's really hard to put numbers on the table because it always depends on the crop. It depends on the growing system. But in general, if you think about it, it's already a huge improvement in terms of space.
I guess also any calculation you do is going to have to take into account the substrate you use, because you have to get that from somewhere, and the you probably have some nutrient feedstock.
You need to think about the cultivar as well, because depending on the cultivars, there are some that are growing. I mean, you cannot compare. It wouldn't be fair to compare. Let's say lettuces growing in a greenhouse with herbs in a vertical farm. I mean, you have to really, or you have to will have the same variety, the same substrate, the same fertigation system.
Actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Is so when you is a lettuce that you grow in a vertical farm the same cultivar? You know, do you have like dwarf plants, or what? Well,
lettuces are actually very small in terms of height, so you can have the same cultivars. So, in general, all the it depends on the company. I'll speak for what we do at Inffarm. So we do have we work with certified organic seeds, because we are certified to be pesticide free. So it has to be pesticide free from the beginning to the end. So the seeds are organic certified, and those are seeds that are also sold to different growers beyond or besides vertical farmers. So there are big seed producers that are globally available, but they produce organic seeds. So they're the same. The seed is the same. So yeah, in principle, you can have the same lettuce growing in a vertical farm and in a greenhouse if you wanted to.
But so if I get back to the substrate, right? So if I want to imagine the system, I guess I can add some footage over the top of what these systems look like. But so for those that are just listening, you have stacked systems, and the plants are growing in hydroponics, or they're growing in a substrate, or what are they growing?
Yeah, there are different ways to grow them. So I'm gonna go from like the general, what more or less everybody in the industry uses. So you can have hydroponics, which is you would require a solution. In hydroponics, you have something that is called NFT, so the plants are constantly growing in a solution. Or you can have even flow irrigation, in which they just go, they will be flooded, and then the water will be removed, and then they will stay there. And you have also aeroponics, in which you just have mist of like a cloud of irrigation that creates a mist around the roots, and then they don't grow. They don't need really any liquid to have the nutrients delivered to them. And depending on the system, you can also have different substrates. So depending also on the product, you can have mats that are of cellulose mats if you grow microgreens or other types of cut product. You can have also rockwood. Sometimes they use rockwood as another type of substrate. Or you can have peat moss. This is the mostly one, the one that is mostly used, or peat moss combined with cocoa as well, either as a loose substrate or as a block. At Infar, we mostly use peat moss combined with cocoa. It's a very common substrate that is also used in traditional agriculture. And it depends on the crop. It can vary the crop. You can also put some other components like perlite or.
But see, the reason why I was interested in asking this question specifically is because I wanted to know how, obviously you're getting that from somewhere.
Yes.
And so you want to have a system that's as close as possible, I guess. And also you want to use are these renewable materials? What sort of damage do you do just from the substrate alone? So
peat moss is actually a non-renewable material, and this is a material that it's basically, it comes from the deposits of sphagnum. It's a moss. It's just a very it's a very enriched organic matter that you can find in the Netherlands, for example, they have huge fields where you can extract peat moss. So it's not a non-renewable source. And this is a challenge not only for the vertical farming industry, actually, but for the whole food production industry, because most of the substrates are not renewable. So you have to find a way. So we're now trying to, have initiatives in order to lower the amount of peat moss that we have in the system to use something else. There's also something interesting that I read about from a research institution. I think it was the Jülich Institute. They're very interested in circular economy projects. So there's also huge potential in the future to have a way to recycle, like to create your own substrate from the whatever food waste that you have in the system, to recirculate it back into the system. It's still, I think, in very early stages of research development, but that there is a potential to do so that we become, in an industry, we all have to be more and more independent of peat moss. So there are also alternative materials. There are a lot of companies now that they offered substrates that are based on some carbohydrates, plant-derived carbohydrates that they build like a membrane or like a foam. That's also, but it's plant-based, so you can also use that. We've done some trials on that, and they look very, very promising as well.
So that's sort of the direction you want to move.
Yeah, it's a challenge, not, as I say, not only for the vertical farming industry, but in general for the whole food industry who uses peat. Peat is a very good substrate because it can hold a lot of nutrients and the water, so you can really lower the amount of irrigation, so it's quite good. But you need to get away from it at some point. We are working towards that. We have to.
I know that. So you mentioned that these systems use less pesticides, and that these are organic seeds that you're using. But so
we don't use pesticides at all.
See, this is one thing that I was a bit curious about, because I know that. So at the Max Planck in the labs there, I know that occasionally they get infestations with any lab, right? You get infestations of insects. And I guess also if you have a nutrient feedstock in large quantities, those can go moldy. And so how do you control for, is it just that you're growing seeds, everything is in-house, and so you're never importing insects or pests? Is that the...
Well, there are different strategies that so you can really, at the moment, we cannot really work in a sterile environment. But we do have a lot of control on the environment. So what we do is that we, from the beginning to the end, we maintain a system that doesn't promote the growth of any pathogen. So we don't have to use any pesticides or fungicides. So when it comes to the seeds, so of course they come as they are, and the substrate as well. So whatever it is inside, you cannot control. But then what we do is that we applied beneficial insects and beneficial microorganisms that kind of compete with the potential pathogens. So you kind of have a little ecosystem in which everything is imbalanced.
Okay. So you've got a mini world.
And you have a mini world there, and then with application of beneficials, you can already lower down any potential pathogen that is in the system. Also, the irrigation system that we have, it's cleaned with a UV light every time we irrigate. And because it's an automated system, everything is automated, so there is no contact. There's not really, you minimize the contact with people way more than in a traditional farm, because you have automated seeding. The plants go into a farm and you don't touch them. You just take them out when they are ready to harvest. You can automate cutting and packaging, so there's no contact.
I was kind of imagining in the future that people would be able to visit the urban farm and pick their own, but that's not going to happen because you want to have an isolated system.
It's a very nicely an ideal world, but I guess like even now, it's not even in the future, like if you think about the vertical farms that Inffarm has in the stores, you have them in the supermarket, and people can see the plants growing, but they are not the ones harvesting. So we have people who go there and they harvest them, and people get them right after harvest, but they are not allowed to get into the farm.
You can't pick it out like a lobster.
Yeah, no. It's not. Like I want it. Yeah, no.
Are there plants which you just can't grow practically or economically because you have pests out in the field, which now become available in these sort of systems? So I guess the question is, are there plants which, for economic reasons and just for practical reasons, which now suddenly we might get access to here in the West?
We do have the possibility to introduce new crops that are very tricky to have, for example, in Europe. That's for sure. It's a more complex question than that, because let's talk about the current products that you have in vertical farming. So most of the vertical farms produce herbs. I mean, counting Infarm as well. Herbs, leafy greens, lettuces, and from the range of from those crops, you can vary a lot, and there are a couple of crops that can be a little bit more exotic that you can put in. So for example, I really like one that is called wasabi rucola that I never saw before until I started working at Infram, and it's a very, very spicy rucola. It really is. It tastes like wasabi, which is quite nice. I don't know if it was a really big product before. It might have been grown before somewhere, because we had it from somewhere. But I've never seen it so much in the market as now. So we have the possibility to expand the range of crops that we grow in the categories that I mentioned now. I just mentioned. So in terms of herbs, you can grow now herbs that weren't very exotic before, and that we couldn't really, there was not a market for it. And this is also part of the job of the vertical farming industry. We're also trying to bring to the consumers new products that were not available before, and you can have them now because we grow them here. So wasabi rucola is a good example of it, or Peruvian mint. It's something that are very culinary herbs that were not very well known. You can put them in the market now, and there are other crops that will have the potential to be grown in a vertical farm, and that haven't been grown in traditional agriculture for many other reasons, maybe because they're not unknown. So there is a nice program. We have a breeding program at Infam, and we're looking very various species that are very uncommon to the public, and to introduce them in the vertical farming system. Now, other crops that are well known, so let's say like tomatoes or staple crops and such, they still bring staple crops, for example. They're still grown outside, and you can grow them, and they have a lot of challenges. We have to deal with climate change, droughts, pests, and there is a potential to grow them in vertical farms, but it's not. There are a lot of steps that are required to be able to grow these crops in vertical farms.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, a good example would actually be wasabi. I think that is only grown locally in Japan and places like this, and we actually don't get real wasabi here in the West, as far as I understand.
Well, it's wasabi rucola. It's called wasabi rucola.
I know, but you made me think of the. But the other one would be the cashew fruit. I think we don't get that. But see, the thing I'm a bit curious about is, industrial agriculture is a finely tuned machine that's been developing for many years, and so it's sort of a tough act to follow. And so I was kind of curious what the angle is that that vertical farms can break into the market with. Is the idea that you gain access to these? You don't necessarily at the outset have to compete with the industrial system that's currently there, because you're really bringing in new species, new cultivars, and you're creating a new market. Is that sort of what makes these economically viable, I guess, is the sort of question I'm aiming at.
Well, I'm probably not the expert to answer this, but I mean, in general, so going back to the crops that I just mentioned, so those crops are very easy to grow in a vertical farm, and these are crops for which you can do a lot of automation. So let's say vertical farms are built in a way so that you can optimize the space, you can optimize resources. And to make them viable, you need to introduce a lot of automation. So the crops that you introduce in the system need to be compatible with these strategies. So, of course, I'm not saying we are now part of the solution in terms of food production, because we can put all these tools together to create food that otherwise would have been produced in a greenhouse setup or traditional agriculture with way more resources. So in that sense, for the crops that are currently suitable for vertical farms, we have shown that we can really compete quite good, because you can really create a lot of biomass. You have very high yields. You can automate processes, so you reduce a lot of the OPEX and CAPEX. And that's already a quite big mark compared to traditional agriculture for these specific types of products. When it comes to other new products, there are other challenges that we'll need to face, because at the moment, for example, there is the next step, I think, will be, for example, having staple crops in a vertical farm. But for that, there are a lot of steps that we will need to go through before we get there.
And there you mean wheat and things like this?
Like wheat, rice, I don't know, yeah. But it's still, it's been something in the horizon from the researchers' point of view. Like, what's the potential of growing wheat in a vertical farm? There are a couple of universities that have been published some studies about it, on really what the potential will be and what will be the ideal ideotype. But it is indeed clear that for this type of crops, we need to have breeding strategies to breed those crops for a vertical farm, which is a completely different focus than to breed for outside crops.
Yeah, I want to ask you about how you develop a line a little bit later on in the discussion. But so I guess you really can bring down the prices for certain cultivars even now at the outset. And so it's not necessarily an exclusive thing.
No. That's the whole point. To have affordable food, high quality affordable food for everybody. So if you think about it, the types of herbs that we offer, they're really affordable. We work with retailers. We don't work with like at Infarm, for example, with most of the vertical farm in industries. They don't sell like very exclusive restaurants or no. There's something that you can have on your table any day. If you like to buy food from retailers, we do sell food. We do sell our products in retailers. So it's something out there for everybody.
And I guess one of the big savings, as you said at the beginning, is that you shorten the supply chain.
Yes.
So you have less wastage. And if you're saving 30% of your crop, or whatever the percentage, that's a huge percentage.
Yeah. I'm not. We haven't measured really quite a lot, but if it's reported that 20% of the food that is produced is wasted through supply chain, I'm sure that we are way below that already.
And I guess also, I don't know if this is the case, but if you've homogenized the system and you have ideal settings, then every item of food that comes out is going to look perfect. And so on the shelf, customers are going to maybe a higher percentage will be selected by customers.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have, that's another beauty of the system, that you have such a good control of the environment that plants grow homogeneously. You don't have strange variations, and we have the possibility to work on a target weight, and we reach that target weight. Every 99% of the time, our harvest performance is really high.
So you have sort of cartoon items of food coming out.
Yeah, exactly.
But so this is one thing that I don't know which way, I'm not sure which side of the fence things are going to fall on. Because I can imagine that, as we discussed, these indoor farms, these vertical farms with controlled systems, give you access to a wide variety of cultivars that you otherwise might not have access to. But at the same time, you're creating homogenized systems. And so do you think ultimately we're going to have a less or a more diverse set of food crops that we're actually eating? Because, at the moment, we're restricted by the fact that in that field you can only grow this type of tomato, and maybe over in this location you grow this. But here everything's homogenized. So are we going to end up with one tomato? And which direction do you think this is going to push ultimately?
I do think that the fact that we grow very homogeneous crops doesn't mean that we cannot have diversity on the things that we grow. So I do think that we have the potential to have a diverse production. If you think about salads, let's take the simple salad as a salad mix. Salads, everyone knows that they're like lettuces, probably some spinach in it, and rucola. But we have the potential to, for example, have salad mixes that have some leafy greens in them, some sorrel, even flowers if you wanted to. Of course, those plants will be homogeneously grown, and they will have pretty much the same size and biomass when they come out of the system, but you can You can also have a diverse catalog of products to offer inside this crop category.
And I suppose that'll also be something that distinguishes companies. I mean, if you have Infarm is competing in this side of the market and some other companies competing over here, one of the things you can present to customers is we have these cultivars that no one else has, or we've sort of found this corner of the market that we do really well in.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you really how. I mean, you could, of course, potentially you can do everything. I don't know if that's I don't know if that will become a main competition strategy in the market. It's hard to say for me. I couldn't tell you, but I could imagine that. I mean, we try to do that. We try to have also very, very new stuff in the market. Of course, you cannot have everything new growing in the system because, at least Infarm compared to other vertical farming, we're a global company. That means that what we do guarantee is that the basil that you have in Berlin will be the same basil that you have in the States. So, of course, you cannot choose any wild basil to grow because you need to have availability of seeds. But you can introduce, for example, Thai basil and Greek basil. So, yeah. So that can be a little bit of a plus, yes, I think. So, yeah.
On the topic of perfect crops and being within sort of the 99%. You mentioned before we started talking, before the interview, that you had, or I don't know if you or someone in your company had produced, I think it was strawberries for the Matrix movie or something. Like, why? How did this happen?
No, I couldn't tell you much about it. We just got a request that we wanted to. There was some interest on putting futuristic food growing environment in the movie, and at that time, and we are still we were doing some research on strawberries, and they were very interested in how the setup would grow, and then we provided the strawberries. But the strawberries are actually have been produced in vertical farms already. So there was a company, they're not in anymore, but there was a company in France that was one of the leads on strawberry production in vertical farming. They had the vertical farms come in different formats. So one of the formats is a container farm. So you have a shipping container that you adapt to grow plants inside, and they produce strawberries. So,
I see. But so it was because you can also produce. They wanted to see the whole growing.
Yeah. So I don't know if the movie. I haven't seen the movie. I just saw the snapshot of the scene, and it looks a little bit sci-fi, but it kind of represents pretty much what we do. So they had the plant and growing in this LED setup with LEDs, and then they had like a camera monitoring the plant and telling like some statistics about the plant, and that's how they kind of grow it. But this is not far away from reality. We actually do that in order to monitor the plants because, as I mentioned, plants go into the system and they just come out once they need to be harvested. So we need to monitor them. So we have in our farms we have a system of various sensors to monitor the environment. We have all these farms are connected into a cloud, so we get real-time data of the environmental conditions of the farm. And we also have phenotyping technologies that monitor the plant growth and can give us information about growth rate, height, digital biomass. We can have any indicators of greenness and other multispectral indexes that can be related to plant health. So we do monitor them live. And
so what's the reason why you're connected to the cloud? Can you control what are the levers you can pull? So there's temperature, the gas composition.
So
what do you
control? So we control temperature, humidity, CO2 input, airflow, irrigation number, light intensity. Daily you can monitor can change daily the dimming settings. And with all that, you pretty much have everything covered, everything that the plant needs. So there are things that you can adjust at a big farm level, and there are things that you can adjust at the bench level, depending on the crop. So that's another interesting thing of the system as we have it here, is that in one vertical farm, you can grow many different crops with different requirements. So you can grow in the same farm lettuces, herbs, leafy greens in the same farm, and we adjust just tiny bits of light settings or irrigation frequency. Yeah.
Is something that sort of sprang to mind is there is it difficult when you bring in a new agricultural setting? Is there sort of regulation you need to get around, or can anyone go out and just grow plants in whatever way and then sell them? Or are there, what's the regulatory environment like? Is it tough to put new cultivars on the market, or you can just do it?
Well, in general, you have to stick to general safety regulations for food production. They are not exclusively for vertical farming. So, and it depends of the product. So, for example, for cut product, there is a set of specific regulations. Wherever it comes from, it can come from greenhouses or from a vertical farm. The cut product needs to have certain standards of like to show no microbial loads. The shelf life data needs to be registered, etc., etc. So yeah, so you have to stick to general food regulation.
But there's nothing special that sort of distinguishes you from.
No, maybe the only thing that it's a little bit different. It's because in terms of infrastructure. So when you put a vertical farm in a new building, so you need to also keep in mind so some safety regulations in the building, because it's not it's not a field. So in the field you don't have architecture in the field. Let's say, I mean. But if you put a farm in a new warehouse, and you need to make sure that the farms are located in a specific way, that you have safety paths for workers, etc., etc. But those are not really exclusively from vertical farms. Those are exclusively for any building that you do. So you have to adjust.
But, so you're not using genetically modified. No. But even though you're not using this, what's the just out of curiosity? What are the restrictions here in Europe? Is it just against things that use CRISPR and sort of these directed approaches, or is it also against food that's been irradiated? For example, you mentioned you use ultraviolet light on the feedstock.
No, we use it in the water.
In the water?
Yeah.
But so there's no... I know that, for example, radiation is used to kill pests or to... freshen food, let's say, after it's been sitting on the shelf for a while. Yeah. So that's not included.
No, that's not a part of GMOs. GMOs are basically genetically modified organisms. So you have you introduce. So there are different techniques. The classic ones is the introduction of a vector that comes from a bacteria and has a gene that can be inserted into the genome of the plant, and that makes it a new gene, a foreign gene that is in the plant. So for those strict regulations in Europe, we're not allowed to grow them. The CRISPR-Cas discussion, CRISPR-Cas it's somehow in the gray line, because CRISPR-Cas is actually a natural method that some bacteria have developed in order to modify their genome. So it's a natural system. It's not a foreign system. We're using a natural system to create genetic modifications in the plants, but it's still in discussion. And I think the panel for discussion, the next panel in the European Union is going to be next year to define whether or not they are considered GMOs or not.
So this could actually open up the door, because this is the most directed system we have.
Yeah, and it's not very highly efficient, because you have control of the gene sequence that you target. And the location as well, which is different from traditional transformation methods, in which you just, you bombard a tissue with a lot of constructs, and you hope that it gets inserted in the right place, and you don't have secondary or follow-up insertions that can affect other parts of the genome.
Yes, so this is what I wanted to ask you about. I've been told by other people, I don't know if this is true, that one technique is you bombard, I guess, seeds or with tissue. Radiation, and then you just see the variations you get. Is this actually used, or? Yeah,
this is but with radiation or with certain chemicals that you can use to transform seeds. So you just immerse them. So they are mutagenic agents. So they're chemicals that they just can cause damage or not damage, they can affect the DNA sequence randomly inside the genome.
Okay.
And then you just hope that one of those hits will generate a trait that you're interested in.
And so does that fall under the traditional GMO?
Yeah, that's part of the traditional GMO.
Okay, so that's the sort of thing it's funny that CRISPR wouldn't be counted potentially as GMO, so it's a highly selective.
Yeah, but the method itself is found in nature. The principle is found in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that we as humans created. It's not a chemical that we develop. It's not a bombarding gun. It's just inserting, trying to apply a biological process inside that is already found in some bacteria to transform plants.
One of the things you mentioned, you said you already have strawberries, and so for certain cultivars, I thought you needed bees to pollinate. How do you pollinate?
Well, we've been at the R&D level. We've been doing trials with fruity crops, and pollination is one of the things that needs to be modified in vertical farming, because pollination. For example, for this company that produced these strawberries in France, because they had a container farm, so for them it was quite easy just to bring the bees in and then take them out.
Okay.
It was easier to control. So depending on the setup, you can still use biotic pollination. But for other systems, in our case, for example, it's not possible to have biotic pollination, so you have to find alternatives for it. So there are been reports of using wind, vibrations. It's already in the literature, and we're just trying to find the best strategy. So, and that's a combination of hardware and biology together, because you need to find. We work together with the engineers to define airflow settings, vibration settings. How does this translate into a station that you can use for pollination? How do they get the plants there? How do we take them out? How do we monitor that pollination was done efficiently in an automated way? Because the idea is that you want to automate everything. So it's something that we are working at the moment.
So you can literally have bursts of wind and you just shake the plants.
Yeah, exactly. So you can really blow the plants with different frequencies and different speeds of wind, and that works actually. It has been published already, and we've seen that wind pollination also works. Vibration also works.
But so I imagine you said it was, if I'm getting the numbers right, you have 150 square meters in your largest.
154 in the. So
that's like 2 large apartments, I guess, in Berlin.
Yeah, very large ones.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm asking is because I guess if these scale well, you could even just have bees living in the.
Well, yes, yeah. In our particular case, it's a bit tricky because you will see we have our farms are a closed box, and the plants are moving through stations. So we have the plants go from a light station to a dark station to an irrigation station.
But is it a conveyor belt, or what do you mean?
There's an elevator in the middle. So so the plants move around. So you don't have a static growth. Other farms, there are other vertical farming companies that have just shelves, and the plants are going. They have a belt or they have a forklift that takes the plants, puts them there, and they stay there. Yeah. And they have day and light statically in that shelf. We have a dynamic system in which the plants go to whatever station they require to be. So they go into the system, and then they go to light, and then they go to sleep, and then they go to have irrigation. They're moving around, and it's all automated. But that means that you need to have sensors there. The elevator needs to move, and if you have flies or bees are flying around, it's very tricky because they're actually very keen to touch the far red sensors. Okay. So it's really tricky. So it's really tricky you cannot control the movement, and if you have an automated system, and any small disturbance will affect the system. So it's really tricky to have them inside. So
actually, it's just better to use.
So that's why you need to use abiotic pollination.
So does the system also move the plants for harvesting?
Yes.
So there's like a harvesting. There's what do you call a seeding, like a planting station?
So we do have a seeding phase. So we have a seeding machine where the plants are seeded. Then they go to a nursery phase. And in the nursery phase, currently it's happens in the specific smaller growth chambers, but that will slowly change. So and then the seedlings have to, depending on the crop, but after 1, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the crop, it's always dependable. They will move to the big farm. And then you have an entrance to the farm, you put the plants in, plants go in, they spend there 2 weeks, they grow very nicely, and then you harvest them in the same entry point.
I see. Oh, it's very nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you sort of started with herbs and this sort of thing. Is that, I'm guessing they're technically simpler and they just have better margins, or like how do you select your, like, well, okay, I know that one of the things that you work on is developing new lines, for instance, right?
Well, we don't develop new lines at the moment. No, it's just that. So we started with crops that are easier to grow. So in general, the industry, you have basically limitations in the vertical area. So you have limitations on height. So there's not much things that you can grow in very like 30 centimeters. So you have to go for crops that are short, that are fast growing. And basically, those requirements are perfect for crops like herbs, for leafy greens and lettuces, and microgreens as well. It's a height limitation, basically. The next step, as I mentioned, and this is a very nice market to start into. If you want the vertical farming systems or the vertical farming industry, we are there as an alternative to food production. I don't think that we will replace the current traditional agriculture. It will be, I don't know, in the future, can't tell, but who knows, maybe. But I don't think now we will do it, because there's still a very limited range of crops that we can grow in these systems because of the hardware itself. And the next challenge then will be to breed crops that are suitable to grow in vertical farms. That's the next step.
So you want a short apple tree that's 30 centimeters high? Or
I wouldn't, but then exactly. But then if you want to make the effort of breeding something, then let's make breeding for something that really has an impact on the food production system and the food consumption. So I wouldn't go for apples, basically, but I would think about something like a staple crop, like wheat, rice. I don't know.
So we're not going to see orchards inside?
I don't think so. Somebody asked me if we could grow avocados in it or something like that.
That would be amazing, because they have huge water consumption,
yeah,
right?
But I think, but that's another issue, It's good that as mankind, we use technology to improve our lives, but we need to be also a little bit more conscious of, just because we can produce things better or we can produce more doesn't mean that we really need to produce everything. Like, why do we really need to have avocados like on the table every day? I do love them, but and I'm happy because I'm South American, so the first time I came to Europe, I really missed avocados until they started appearing in the market. But I'm thinking, like, do we really need to have that? Like, we could have just also be a little bit more conscious on how food gets to our table, and then just try to make choices that limit the transport of food to our table. Not waiting for some development to happen so that you can grow avocados in your kitchen, it's but that's let's say my view.
So your view would be then that you like the fact that we have seasonal varieties that come in and come out, and you like the fact that certain areas have different variety. If I imagine avocados back home, you've got all different varieties that you don't have here. So you're hoping that this will be built into the system, or? I
think what the vertical farming industry has highlighted is that we really can use a lot of the technology that we have available for many other things into food production. So I'm not saying that I don't know if it's feasible or not to have vertical farms in Colombia, where I come from. We'll be very interested, but I think, for example, Colombia is a place that has a lot of resources, so there has not been a lot of need to optimize the resource efficiency. But I do think that we can use technologies that are applied into vertical farming system in any other production system. You know, like because nobody else has been using them a lot because they really don't have to. But I think we need to start using technology to optimize their resource use efficiency of food production systems. And vertical farming is an example of how you can do it, because we need to do it. We have to do it in order to be efficient, in order to be competitive. So if we want to really show that we can grow with way more or less water, then we need to have a system that is automatically controlling the amount of water that comes in, that cleans the water automatically, that recycles water automatically. So there's a lot of technology that goes into it. That is.
I guess this is one of the benefits. What you're going to have less runoff going into the ocean, destroy it. Because actually, this is one of the big downsides of industrialized agriculture, that it destroys.
The amount of water that is being used is immense.
So you brought up an interesting. So Colombia is sort of blessed with its climate.
It's an amazing place.
Right. So you can grow, and I guess there are other countries like, I guess, the US and Ukraine and places like this are known for being able to produce vast amounts of staple crops. So one thing I'm wondering about, are there any countries that are particularly well positioned to sort of dominate the urban farming market? Or are we going to see, how is this going to, how are these developments going to affect food security? Are we going to see new places that sort of dominate this new market? Or?
Well, this market kind of started appearing in the Northern Hemisphere. So I do think that... you mean that you mentioned the States, and ironically, even though they have vast areas for growing, they're actually one of the pioneers of vertical farming. So most of the bigger, the well-known vertical farming companies in the world, they're American companies. We have AeroFarms, for instance. They're really big, and they started there. So it's not about let's say how much resources a country has. It's more about how we start changing the way we produce. And this is very country specific and very, let's say, depends on the market as well, Like in Europe, it became a very popular development because in Europe, the diet has turned out also to be a little bit more meat-free, more healthy, more local. So there's a couple of needs in the market. So I can imagine that other areas of the world, like Asia, will be also coming up as leaders, and Japan does it very well. It's very well known to have a lot of they call it plant factories. So they have it already, and other countries in Asia, of course. It's hard to tell from my side as a biologist to have an idea of what I think will be the market out there, but I do think that it doesn't necessarily correlate with the resources of a country. It might, but it's not a one-to-one correlation.
I was wondering if these developments might sort of democratize agriculture in two ways. So first of all, you can grow those strawberries in the middle of the Sahara potentially.
Yes.
And secondly, one of the things you mentioned is that you shorten the supply chains. So it might then become cost preventative to import because you're not working at scale anymore if you're shutting down all the trade networks, let's say. And so it might be just more efficient to now this country that never grew food locally, it makes sense now rather than importing. Yes. And so you might open up whole new markets that weren't there before.
Yeah, I think so. There is one concept that was always about like when we talk about food security, food security means for many places the availability of getting food. But I think you can call it more to be really fair and to be more democratic. It will be more like food independence in the sense that it's not about that you get food no matter what. So but it's more about you being able to produce your own food. As a country. So I'll give you a very quick example. It sounds a little bit outside the vertical farming industry, but in Colombia, Colombia is a very diverse place, and you can grow whatever you want. but really, literally, you can grow everything. Maybe some crops that
cherries, maybe
cherries not, but there are a bunch of other fruits that you can eat instead of cherries that are very good. So, but then there are places in Colombia in which I was living there. There was a place that they extract a lot of oil in that place, so there's not a lot of agriculture around, and people were saying, yeah, but look here, people have food because we have all this revenue from the oil extraction. And you couldn't get any bananas. Look, I mean, the weather was a very hot place, and you could grow really everything there. But the food that you could get there was food that was produced in Chile, for example. I was eating apples from Chile in the middle of the tropics in Colombia, which for me was an absurd idea. And it was still in the sense of, yeah, you have food security, if I'm quotation mark, because of course there is a revenue from the oil companies so that you can access and you can buy food that is imported into your table. But that's not really what food security means. It means that you can be able to grow your food locally and have it locally to you and accessible to you.
Yeah, I suppose the one worry that I have along these lines is, one of the things that keeps the world in peace is that we trade with one another. Yeah. This is sort of outside of your biology background, but do you have any feeling about this? Do you think this is going to actually impact, I guess, world peace? It's a big question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big question to ask. I mean, you mean like if vertical farming will have a big effect of it?
The social implications of it's very good that you're okay. So the environmental benefit of shutting down long-range trade network. I mean, these are very efficient networks. So at the moment, maybe they are the most efficient environmental system to have in place. But the downside might be that when you shut down if you're really able to dominate the market, and now all of your stable crops are produced locally, the thing that I would worry about is that you remove this interconnectedness that sort of...
I think in general, we do need to change the way how we produce food. So the way it's happening to now, to have this long supply chains, that has to change either way. And the market will have to evolve with it. Because it's not sustainable. I mean, we already know that the CO2 footprint of planes, I mean, like we have to change it. There is no option anyway. And I do think that the market will have to adapt then accordingly, and everything will run as an engine in a different way.
And I guess one of the things that sort of counters my worry is that you don't have, if you can democratize the market, now you're not having resource strains between countries. Like, you can really produce everything in every location. Let me ask you about, do you think ultimately, so a big part of this is automation. Do you think that this is going to lead to the explosion of new jobs, or do you think this is going to reduce the number of jobs that are required ultimately?
It already has changed the availability of new jobs.
Oh yeah?
Because when you think about data scientists, just to give you a quick example, data scientists, nobody thought that data scientists are crucial players in agriculture, and they are. For the vertical farming industry, they are. Because we can control a lot of the environment that we have. We can collect so much data, and we need to know how to process this data and how to improve the system, how to make the systems smart. How to, like AI is something that is out there to improve the use efficiency of vertical farms, and data scientists are a key part of it. And it's already changing. It's not something in the future. Like if we think about the colleagues that I have, our team, our R&D team, of course we have biologists, we have horticulturists, agronomists, but part of it is it's really engineers, data scientists. That's the core of it. So it has already changed.
So the workforce of agriculture is just going to be completely...
And it's actually even more interesting because you can have... this is one of the things I really like about this job, actually, is that I have the chance to learn from so many different areas, and you can start to think about how you can apply things from a completely different industry into the food industry. So we have people that had worked for these companies that optimize the use of electrical bikes.
Okay.
So people who work in very random places that we never thought will be working in a food producing company, but we kind of think on how can we optimize the system, how can we make it smarter. That's very interesting, and it has already changed, and I think it should be like this. Because as mankind, we have a lot of challenges, so we need to put all the different minds together to push forward.
So what do you think the next big technology is that's coming in urban farming? What's the big exciting, are there any big things on the horizon that we're sort of seeing coming?
Well, I do think that the applications of AI into production systems, it's critical. We started working on that. We do have some systems in place but they're still not quite there. They're not as smart enough, but they need to get smarter. And I think that that's the plus. One of the on one side, and the other side is the challenge of having to broaden the type of products that you can grow in a vertical farm. So it's not only about breeding staple crops to be suitable for a vertical farm. It's about everything that comes with it, because actually you need to have a lot of automation of processes. So how do you optimize harvest in wheat in a vertical farm? How do you optimize you have to automate pollination, for example. That's a good example. So can
you take me through what that looks like then? Like say for example, how do you what does the picture look like from a point of view of we want to introduce a new crop? Like, are you able to sort of paint a picture of how you initially select what cultivar to use and then the steps that it takes to actually, from the conception to now it's on my plate?
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, well, let's start with the crops that we already have, because that's the most straightforward. So there is always like a market research or a client that wants a different specific product. So we have a product team. They come to the crop science team and say, we want to grow this type of, let's say, lettuce or whatever. So the first thing that we do is that we screen cultivars, and we look for seed companies that have specific requirements. So organic certified seeds, availability worldwide, because this product is not for a client X. We also plan to, if we have it for one location, we want to put it in another location, so they have to be. And then we do basic tests like germination tests, and then we already have gathered a lot of knowledge on how to grow most of leafy greens and lettuces already. So we already kind of know, okay, these environmental settings will work. So we try those first. And if not, then we tweak them a bit. We need to adjust to yield. And then we have what we call a growing recipe. So we develop a growing recipe. Then after that is set up, this passes to a production run to see if the crop actually behaves as it does in research, because researchers were a little bit more careful. We have a little bit of control. We monitor constantly. And this growing recipe contains information of everything. So it contains information of how many seeds you put per area, what's the nursery time that you require, what's the light setting, what are the light settings, humidity, temperature, irrigation frequency, what is the nutrition composition of the fertigation solution, everything. And we just put it in a cookbook, in a recipe, and then this goes to production, and then they do the production run. There's also, of course, depending on the product, we do post-harvest evaluation of it. So if it's a cut product, if it's a pot, if it's a herb that is being so loose. So we also have to evaluate what the shelf life of this product will be, so that the client knows what to expect. We do shorten supply chain, of course, but we are still depending on shorter supply chain conditions. So even though the plants are not traveling for 2 weeks or something, or in a plane, we still need to take into account the time that they spend from here into the supermarket or the retailer. We propose packaging material that is sustainable or that provides a good shelf life. And everything then goes to a production run, and then it goes, and that's it. But those are for crops that are already, like from the nature, already suitable for vertical farming. Other crops that are a little bit more complex, like if you move towards fruity crops, which is the next step for vertical farms, Then they require other types of things, but it's basically the sense of cultivar selection or so. You kind of screen around what it's out there already, and then depending on the crop, then you have to tweak certain things. So, for example, the pollination is one of them. So you have to work a little bit harder on have effective pollination with abiotic means, but it's just having like more points to the recipe. So just creating, and then the same is pretty much straightforward. In the future, for other crops, like when it comes to staple crops, for example, there are there are two ways to do it. So either you can, and that's part of the challenges, and it's not only Inffarm, it's like there are also a lot of initiatives in research institutions to think about how we can breed for vertical farming. So what we have at the moment in terms of knowledge is that we need to have an idea, an isotype. So we need to have what will be the ideal form of a crop, and this is where we are at the moment. So what are the traits that this crop needs to have to be grown in a vertical farm? And the tricky part there is it's completely different to what you have already in the field. Like breeders have bred for drought resistance, like to deal with things with changes in the environment. The traits that are required for vertical farming are completely different. So this is what we are at the moment. We are at the point in which we are defining the traits that are relevant to grow in a vertical farm suitable staple crop.
So it's actually, you're really at the beginning then of this sort of breeding.
If you think about it, vertical farming is very new. So I mean, I think we're doing a lot of fast steps.
So I hadn't really thought about that. So like if you want to grow in, let's say, Australia, maybe you need your crops to be drought resistant.
Yeah.
But then I guess if you can control the environment and you can make the environment perfect or as perfect as possible, then really you can breed for taste, size, all sorts of
different traits,
biomass, for example. And so really this is opening up the door to having much nicer food.
Yes.
Potentially.
Yes. And you don't have to go so far in breeding. We can already do it just by controlling the environment. So we already do it. For the crops that we're currently growing, we can optimize the environment so that they have a specific architecture, specific coloration, specific nutritional composition. Not for everything, but we have it for some, and we have the potential to do it even more.
So I hadn't really appreciated this. You in some sense, you're able to a certain extent, bypass the need for genetic modification because the environment can be...
Not bypass it. Let's say for certain things, you can already bypass it. No, and not even bypass it. It's just that we have the possibility to push what nature already has to offer in a different way. I'll give you a quick example. Like red coloration in lettuces. So in general, plants can synthesize a lot of photoprotective pigments, like when they have excess of light. And you can make a lettuce that is green turn red if you want to. And that's already quite nice. And I'm not even touching the genes. It's just changing the environment so to trigger something in their physiology. And we do it.
So what's that? Is it you have too much light, or what's the...
There are different ways to do it. So a lot of the research, for example, in light, in vertical farming is playing with the spectra. And this is a topic that is actually very interesting because it's something that nobody else can do. You have the sunlight, and the sunlight has a fixed spectra. You can change that. But in a vertical farm, you have the possibility to change the light spectra that you provide to the plant. And you can change it in a way that you have always either the peaks of wavelength, or like you can change or you can customize the wavelength of light that you provide to the plants, that the energy is also efficiently used. And you can switch it in terms of percentages to trigger a specific metabolic response.
But so I hadn't really appreciated this. So you can change the color first off by changing the light spectrum. I guess you could also... If you're looking at let's say broccoli or something, maybe you can grow a plant with a longer stem or with more leaves.
And that doesn't really take too much effort, to be honest. Not even, you didn't have to go that far. Let's say basil.
Yeah.
You have different types of. You can have basil in different formats, so you can sell it like as a plant, as a little in a pot, or in a plug, or if you want to have cut product in bundles, you if you just change the density of the seeds that you use and the density of plants that you grow per square meter, you already have elongation. You don't even have to go that far to the spectra. You can already just changing the amount of plants per area that you have. You get different morphologies, and you can adjust it depending on the product.
And so this is all built into the recipes that you're building
exactly.
up.
So yeah, so those and we get when we get a request, we need to know for what type of. They give us a general architecture, and then we can modify it. So basically, it's a nice example. If you want to have cut product, you need to make sure that those products, because if they're going to be cut and sold in bundles, then you need to have somehow longer stems and more leaves at the top than at the bottom. So you have to play with all the tricks. I
can sort of see where the market is opening up for this sort of thing, because you have, let's say, for example, the supermarket come in and say, not just we want basil, but we want it that's going to fit this sort of a packaging and that's going to have this sort of a profile and characteristic. That's really cool. It's not an aspect that I'd thought about even a little bit.
Yeah, but this is actually one of the things that we try to push forward. It's this potential. So and that brings diversity to your table without having in a very easy way. It's something that it can happen now. It's happening now.
Do you think this is probably way off in the future, but do you think okay, at the moment you have a setup where you're growing, I guess the goal is ultimately to grow at scale. But do you think... We do grow at scale, yes. I mean, you already are, but the idea is that you want a system that you can put in place to feed whole cities, right? And so the question is, do you think eventually we're going to have a system where you could, I want to go shopping and I've decided that I like basil that has leaves of this size. Do you think there's going to be some sort of personalization that can be built into the system? Like I'm a customer I'm a restaurant, let's say, and I buy in bulk from you, and this is sort of the tweaks that I want to make.
We do already have something like that in place. So there is a part of the catalog that is called the culinary herbs. So there are specific herbs that really are kind of tailored for restaurants or for chefs. It already happens. I do, of course, that's a very small market, but yeah, it already happens. So you can, as a chef. So we do have in Berlin, for example, that's one of the niches.
So who knows? Maybe in the future, individuals.
I would like to think more than, but this is again my personal perspective. I don't think it's about. We can of course we can spoil people, in the sense that we have the potential to provide little things. But I think it's more about having very nutritious food on your table, like to really improve the quality of life, and having a way to control the environment in a way that you can use less resources. You can modify a crop to have a certain nutritional composition and bring it to your table in an affordable price. Is a very fair system, a fair production system.
So I want to move the conversation sort of, I want to sort of end on sort of future prospects. And I realize you may not, this might be something that you're not able to say for sure, of course. But so one thing is, do you think, if you see the way that, for example, Infarm works or other companies work, do you think in the future we're going to be moving towards a system where there are lots of small holdings? For example, back in the day, people had their individual farms, and industrialized agriculture sort of created a system where now we have these huge farms that are controlled by corporations and so on. Do you think in the future we're going to have large warehouses based in the cities, or are we going to have lots of small locations which will service restaurants in the area? What do you think You may not be able to say this is all speculation, but what do you think?
I do think, it's not far away from our present time. We do have farms located in supermarkets, in restaurants already. So it's already happening. People are more aware of where the food is coming from. So for me, the ideal scenario will be more, we do have these production centers close to the cities. People are more aware of where the food is coming from. And we will have definitely the possibility to make food production more sustainable in a way that we introduce technology into the food production system. Having an AI controlled farm in every city that provides food for everyone in an affordable price, it's the dream. And also having the farms connected with the infrastructure of the city, meaning that we have solar panels or wind powering these farms, and get back into the system the food that is not being used, like food waste can be also recirculated into the system. Having governments involved in promoting in new generations the use of many different technologies towards food production. That's for me kind of the dream.
Do you think urban farming will eventually, or vertical farming will eventually involve animals? Or so we already spoke about bees, and you said because of this, your system is dynamic, maybe this isn't very helpful. But do you think eventually we'll have fish, or I guess there's already mushrooms, right?
Well, there are a couple of things already out there in which you have fish produced in pods, and that kind of is the source for fertigation in plants. It happens already in the city. I don't know if that will be a big part of it, but I know that it's already happening as well. With mushrooms, it's actually a good example because it has a huge potential that hasn't been explored yet. So if you have a system in which you have mushroom production facility, mushrooms require a certain type of substrate, so you can actually use plant waste to create that substrate, and then have mush production as well. And the mushrooms itself could have the potential, if you have them tightly connected with your farm, you could use the CO2 production of the mushrooms to drive CO2 into the plants. But that requires, of course, a huge investment in terms of infrastructure. And so, but in a futuristic scenario, that's a possibility, I think.
You could also use mushrooms to make packaging. You still use plastic, right?
Yeah, that's in general the vertical farming industry, and in Infra we are committed to sustainability, and that also includes using packaging materials that are sustainable. So we already, when we do develop a product, we do try to find packaging materials that are more sustainable than plastic. It's also not a thing that the vertical farming industry can solve on its own. It has to be a whole commitment. We are part of the solution, but that also implies that, for example, retailers or supermarkets, everyone is more conscious that, okay, we don't want to have, you really have a tool that can harvest by demand, then you don't need to require a lot of plastic in order to cover the crops if you try to just sell them. But that still is a challenge because logistic-wise, companies are still requiring in the old ways. So that will require a cultural change of a different change in the way we think about how we deliver food, also how we sell food.
When I look in the supermarket, I often see lots of fruit and vegetables that are wrapped in loads of plastic, and so instinctively I sort of try to avoid as much as possible those fruits. But what do you know what the trade-off is like? Because obviously if you're using plastic, that's bad, but also if you're using plastic which stops food from spoiling, is the trade-off worth it? Do you know?
Depends on the product, and also it depends on how long do you want the product to be there. So there are things that are completely unnecessary if you see, for example, I don't know, the other day I saw like some avocados in plastic. I'm like, you don't need to put them in plastic, like going back to avocados. But let's say for other products like cut salad mixes, if you have a cut salad mix, plastic is still very useful because it keeps them fresh. But you can choose the type of plastic, and even though the shelf life might not be the best, you can also put, for example, a modified atmosphere inside the package that puts a little bit longer. And even if it's not as optimal as using 100% plastic, if the client or if the retailer or the supermarket agrees to kind of go with it. So there are ways that you can negotiate to have it still the same amount of products in the same frequency with less plastic that are available for the client. But it becomes a question more beyond the material itself. It becomes a question of the supply chain. It becomes a question of operations inside a supermarket. Mm-hmm. So there is a reason why it's easier to have them all wrapped in plastic, because you can just it's easier just to manage. You just don't have to be careful. You can just put them in bulks in a box and then leave them there, and there is no question of sanitary issues or anything like that. So it becomes beyond the material. It becomes more operations question.
What are the research questions surrounding vertical farming that you find most interesting? If you could work on any research problem at all, what's the sort of thing that would make you most excited?
Well, I'm a biologist by training and a photosynthesis research until I joined Infarm. So there's one thing that I found very interesting, and vertical farms have offered me the possibility to look at it, which is the relationships of plants inside a canopy. So what happens really at a canopy level? So how these interactions between leaves in a canopy level in regards to light, CO2, humidity, and temperature will reflect into the biomass accumulation of the plant. What are the gradients that you can have when you have a very dense canopy? This is something that happens in nature as well, but it's really hard to investigate. And we do have the possibility to investigate it in vertical farms because we can have control of the environment. But also how we can really trick the environment in a very precise way to make the most out of a plant metabolism. So how do we really think about small gradients of CO2, small gradients of temperature? How do we change them? How we monitor them, how we can change them automatically to push the efficiency of CO2 fixation in a crop. That's very interesting. It sounds a little bit trivial, but it's not as trivial, and it requires a level of granularity that we never had before in agriculture or in biology.
So really dialing down.
Yeah, you can dial it to the minute. So how do you change the environment to the minute so that you can get the best out of a plant?
So what the entire life of that plant is going to look like.
Yeah, basically. For example. Yeah, we really like... And we do have that. So we're starting to develop something like that now. And introducing also machine learning algorithms that kind of can identify how bad or good the plant is growing and how we can tweak the environment to keep them in range, let's say. It sounds a little bit like to keep them in line, but yeah, to keep them in range. But also how we can, for example, just reduce the resources. How many interactions in the canopy actually are telling you, okay, actually this crop doesn't really need that much light. And that translates into energy savings.
So let me finish off then with a final question. What are you most excited about with the future of urban farming? What makes you happy for the future in this field? What's the sort of thing that sort of really you find most captivating about the area?
The possibility of combining AI with crop physiology. That's for me the key. Being able to really trick the environment automatically in a way that we can just really have an ecosystem running on its own, basically. That's very the future. And as let's say as a human, like, how we as mankind can we really use these resources in a good way? How can we really start thinking about resource use efficiency in everything that we do, especially in food production? So it's going to the interaction of one leaf with the CO2 at the light at its surface, to how we can introduce ways to lower the footprint of a whole system and use alternative use resources and alternative sources of energy to drive food production. How do governments get involved?
So on the AI side, sort of eventually, hopefully, the system will be that good that you can really maybe the airflow over that leaf, and maybe
not that layer, like this little canopy, like how, and is not really far away. Really. And on the other hand, the other exciting part, that I'm not a geneticist, but I like to be, because I'm a physiologist, but I do think that physiology and genetics are a very key component. So I would like to see what other genetics, or like the need for having new crops in these systems and how to explore this genetic variation opens up also the door to have new physiological variation. So if we define what are the interesting traits for having a staple crop in a vertical farm, what are the physiological components that come into place there? What else is there that needs to be unraveled that we don't know? Because we never had the chance to have control of the environment in such a way for food production as we do now. And as a researcher, that's amazing. It's having a giant growth chamber for you to play with real life data, 24/7. A lot of information that needs to be unlocked and explored and used in a proper way.
And for the benefit of everyone.
For the benefit for everyone. Yeah.
Well, Viviana, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Shane.